It was the moment that broke the illusion. July 18, 2025. The day Boeing officially announced it was halting major segments of its U.S.-based production and transitioning final assembly of key aircraft components to facilities in Mexico and Malaysia. The announcement landed like a bombshell across Washington. But it wasn't just corporate strategy. It was a direct reaction to one man's relentless, self-defeating obsession with economic nationalism, Donald Trump. Just hours later, Trump went on a tirade, slamming Boeing as traitorous, accusing its leadership of selling out America, and threatening a 200% tariff on any aircraft made outside U.S. soil. The stage was set for a catastrophic escalation, one that would not only damage Boeing but ripple across the entire aviation industry and drag the U.S. economy into further disarray. What Trump called economic loyalty, the rest of the world recognized for what it really was: desperation.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
Boeing's tightrope: survive or submit. Boeing didn't come to this decision lightly. For years, the aerospace giant has been battered by a whirlwind of crises: a pandemic-era collapse in demand, manufacturing defects, supply chain breakdowns, and escalating global tensions. But nothing has destabilized Boeing's footing more than the unpredictable, hostile environment created by Trump's second-term terror crusade. Raw material costs surged 34% under new steel and aluminum tariffs. Labor shortages in the U.S. intensified amid immigration cuts and anti-union attacks. Retaliatory tariffs from China, Brazil, and the EU froze billions in existing orders. Boeing had a choice: either go down waving a patriotic flag or adapt to survive in a brutally competitive global market. They chose the latter. And for that, Trump lost it. Trump's America First becomes America Alone. Let's be clear. Boeing's decision to pivot overseas wasn't about abandoning the U.S. It was about facing reality. Trump's economic nationalism demanded that American companies remain tethered to U.S. soil, regardless of global market dynamics. But when Boeing shifted assembly of its new mid-market jet to Monterrey, Mexico, Trump declared it an act of treason. What he failed to grasp is that aircraft manufacturing isn't done in one country anymore. It's a global choreography of parts, logistics, engineering, and supply. The U.S. can't win by locking the doors and yelling at the world to play fair. And Boeing's leadership knew it. CEO Kelly Ortberg made it clear in a press conference: "We are not abandoning America. We're ensuring Boeing can compete, deliver, and grow in a highly volatile and increasingly protectionist world. We owe our employees survival, not slogans." China strikes back. Trump's tantrum didn't end with Boeing. It triggered immediate fallout overseas. Within days of the tariff threats, China canceled $11.2 billion in Boeing aircraft orders, including a fleet of 737 MAX and 787 Dreamliners. In their place, orders for Airbus and Comac. The message from Beijing was unmistakable: if the U.S. won a trade war, it better be ready to lose. Chinese aviation authorities also imposed tariffs on Boeing-made parts, effectively blocking future aftermarket support contracts, a major source of profit for Boeing's international operations. Trump had succeeded in turning a trade dispute into a full-blown geopolitical economic fracture. And America's crown jewel in aviation was the first to suffer, emerging markets to the rescue. Amid the rubble, Boeing didn't just lick its wounds. It retooled its strategy. Instead of begging for Washington's approval, Boeing turned to Asia, Latin America, and India. These regions, projected to account for over 65% of global aircraft demand in the next 2 decades, became Boeing's new frontier. By Q2 of 2025, Boeing inked a $6 billion deal with Indonesia for sustainable aviation platforms. It expanded its Malaysian assembly hub to include avionics and landing gear systems. It established a green fuel partnership with Brazil for SAF, sustainable aviation fuel development. This wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. Trump wanted Boeing to stay in a cage. Boeing broke out and found a bigger sky. Financial fragility, progress, but at a cost. Despite a dramatic pivot, Boeing is still on shaky ground. In Q1 of 2025, The company delivered 130 commercial aircraft, a massive leap from the dark days of 2020. But the numbers underneath tell a grimmer story. $2.3 billion free cash flow deficit. Operational margins remain volatile. R&D investment is still recovering from pandemic-era cuts. Investors are cautiously optimistic, but the risks are enormous. If Trump follows through on his 200% tariff threats, Boeing could face a complete blockade on U.S. airspace sales, cutting off billions in domestic government contracts and commercial orders. The company's survival now hinges on its ability to remain nimble, to keep innovating and growing without being chained to domestic political chaos. Airbus and Comac, circling overhead. Boeing's misfortune has been a golden opportunity for competitors. Airbus is expanding final assembly lines in the U.S. South to woo American buyers who want patriotic alternatives. China's Comac is ramping up its C919 production and offering steep discounts to nations caught in U.S. crossfire. If Boeing gets squeezed from both sides, unable to export freely due to tariffs and losing ground to rivals, it may lose more than orders. It could lose its legacy. That's not an overstatement. That's the consequence of a superpower sabotaging its own champions. Trump's meltdown, a dangerous distraction. Instead of calming markets, Trump escalated. His response to Boeing's overseas move? An executive order banning all federal agencies from purchasing Boeing aircraft not assembled on U.S. soil. The Department of Defense, the FAA, and even FEMA, all blocked from contracting with Boeing unless it brings back production. This wasn't policy. It was political revenge. And while Trump raged, the markets trembled. Shares in other defense and aerospace firms dropped as investors braced for a wider crackdown on global supply chains. America's most strategic industries were being held hostage to one man's ego. Sustainability, Boeing's last bet. There is, however, one bright spot that may save Boeing from further disaster: green aviation. With the EU and Asia introducing carbon penalties on high-emission aircraft, Boeing has accelerated investment into SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and electric propulsion technologies. Their 2030 target? A 70% emissions reduction across all new commercial aircraft. If successful, this could secure billions in contracts from eco-conscious governments and airlines. But it requires support, not sabotage, from Washington. Whether Boeing gets that support remains to be seen. Conclusion: a defining crossroads for industry and nation. This isn't just Boeing's crisis. This is America's industrial reckoning. Trump's zero-sum vision of economics is colliding with the 21st century reality. Global networks, clean tech, and agile manufacturing win. Not isolation, not tariffs, and definitely not threats. Boeing may survive. It may even thrive. But if it does, it will be in spite of Trump, not because of him. And that truth is what terrifies the White House most. Because it proves that American greatness isn't built through fear or force. It's built through freedom, innovation, and the courage to fly higher, even when the ground below is shaking. Trump's steel tariffs didn't just trigger a corporate pivot. They ignited a labor rebellion across the American Midwest. As Boeing shifted work to Mexico and Southeast Asia, unionized machinists, welders, and aerospace engineers found themselves caught in a battle not of their making. In Wichita, Kansas, long known as the air capital of the world, layoff notices flooded inboxes. Local union leaders from the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IMA, blamed the White House directly. Our jobs are being lost not to China, not to automation, but to stupidity, said one union rep at a rally of over 10,000 in St. Louis. We begged Washington to stabilize the industry. Instead, we got tweets and tariffs. Across Ohio and Michigan, picket lines formed outside shuttered supplier plants. Many of these mid-sized firms have been hanging on by a thread since the pandemic, and Boeing's withdrawal was a final blow. It wasn't just production lines that were being severed. It was a decades-old social contract between the American worker and the companies they built, now being torched in real time by erratic policy and political vengeance. The rise of aerospace nationalism. Faced with mounting pressure and criticism from conservative media, Trump did what he always does when backed into a corner. He doubled down. Within days of Boeing's announcement, Trump convened a press conference flanked by hand-picked CEOs and sycophantic appointees. launching what he called America First Aviation Mandate. The policy included mandatory U.S. content quotas for any aircraft sold to U.S.-based airlines, a 25% exit tax on aerospace firms moving production overseas, a new National Aerospace Authority to review contracts for patriotic compliance. It was economic jingoism dressed up in bureaucratic language, and it sent shockwaves through global markets. Aerospace nationalism, once a fringe idea, was now official White House policy. And the message was clear. If you don't play Trump's game, you don't play at all. But Boeing didn't flinch. Global supply chain realignment accelerates. Boeing's overseas moves were part of a broader shift in global manufacturing, with U.S. tariffs making key materials like titanium, composites, and avionics components more expensive domestically. Supply chains began to rewire themselves overnight. Malaysia offered Boeing tax-free status for 5 years and labor protections. India opened discussion for long-term partnerships in sustainable jet fuel production. Brazil's Embraer offered shared production facilities and open access to Latin American airspace markets. And in Europe, Airbus, ever the opportunist, courted Boeing's alienated suppliers and poached talent by the hundreds. The result was a new aerospace order taking shape, one where America, once the center of aviation innovation, now found itself on the periphery. Trump's protectionism wasn't protecting. It was isolating the business case for leaving. Despite the political firestorm, Boeing's business case was hard to argue with. Labor costs in Mexico were 40 to 60% lower. Assembly plants in India cut lead times by 30%. Tax incentives in Southeast Asia trimmed operating costs by nearly $800 million per quarter. Meanwhile, staying in the U.S. meant navigating ever-changing tariffs, political instability, threats of nationalization, and punitive audits. It wasn't just Boeing. GE Aviation, Pratt & Whitney, and Raytheon Technologies were all quietly exploring similar moves. Trump had declared war on disloyal corporations, but in boardrooms across the country, executives responded in the only language that matters: spreadsheets and survival. Wall Street shrugs, then cheers. In an ironic twist, Wall Street, initially panicked by Boeing's pivot, quickly reversed course. Once investors realized that Boeing's international expansion would reduce exposure to U.S. political risk and open new markets, shares rallied 18% in 3 weeks. J.P. Morgan issued a bullish note. Boeing's global reconfiguration will be painful domestically, but vital for long-term competitiveness. That's when the real kicker landed. Even Boeing's most outspoken critics on Capitol Hill, who had decried the company as unpatriotic, continued to hold Boeing stock. Some even bought more. For all their rhetoric about American jobs, they knew Boeing wasn't just another defense contractor. It was an economic organism too vital to fail. And it was now evolving without Washington's permission. The U.S. military watches with concern. There was another stakeholder quietly sweating as the fallout intensified: the Pentagon. Boeing is not just a commercial aircraft manufacturer. It's also a key defense contractor. From Apache helicopters to F/A-18 Super Hornets to satellites and surveillance drones, Boeing is woven into the U.S. military-industrial fabric. And Trump's economic assault had jeopardized all of it. Military officials, off the record, warned that supply chain disruption could delay production of critical weapon systems, slow innovation in space technologies, and increase costs for ongoing contracts. The irony was brutal. Trump's tariffs, meant to make America stronger, were weakening its military readiness. Yet, the administration pressed on, eyes fixed not on national interest, but on narrative control. A nation divided over industry. Public reaction to Boeing's departure split sharply along political lines. In red states, Trump supporters rallied to boycott the company, even launching petitions to ban Boeing aircraft from domestic carriers, an absurd prospect given Boeing's market share. In blue states, workers and economists blamed Trump for pushing American manufacturing off a cliff. In swing states, especially across the Rust Belt, the mood was far grimmer. Local business owners in Toledo, Dayton, and Pittsburgh reported declining orders, canceled contracts, and rising unemployment. And while the MAGA crowd still cheered the tariffs, many quietly admitted they never expected the blowback would land in their own towns. But the damage was already done. Final descent. The American industrial myth collapses. This wasn't just about Boeing. It was about a system cracking under the weight of its contradictions. A president demanding loyalty while making the business climate unworkable. Workers begging for stability while Washington chased headlines. An economy claiming strength while bleeding core industries by the week. Boeing's move wasn't betrayal, it was diagnosis. The U.S. industrial strategy, such as it was, had no plan for global competition, no patience for long-term innovation, and no vision beyond slogans. And the collapse of U.S.-based Boeing production was a symptom no one could ignore. Epilogue. The sky belongs to no one. By the end of 2025, Boeing's international operations had stabilized. The company launched a new green-powered regional jet with parts from 5 countries and final assembly in 2. Orders poured in from India, Australia, and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, the U.S. economy limped into Q4 with rising unemployment in industrial sectors, falling aerospace exports, and growing isolation from global trade agreements. Trump, still tweeting furiously, called Boeing a disgrace to the flag. But for most Americans watching their jobs vanish, their costs rise, and their futures dim, one thing had become abundantly clear. It wasn't Boeing that betrayed America. It was America's leadership that betrayed Boeing. And the sky, it doesn't care about politics. It rewards those who dare to fly. As Boeing finalized its international shift, the impact rippled far beyond factory floors. In communities once fueled by aerospace orders, places like Tulsa, Huntsville, and Everett, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Small machine shops, specialized electronics manufacturers, and raw material suppliers saw contracts vanish overnight. These were not companies with global footprints. They were generational businesses that had anchored their towns for decades. They relied on Boeing's reliability, not just for income but for survival. One supplier in Wichita described it bluntly. "We didn't lose a customer, we lost our identity." By October 2025, the National Association of Manufacturers warned that over 85,000 downstream jobs were at risk due to the collapse of Boeing's U.S. assembly operations alone. That figure excluded logistics companies, parts distributors, and thousands of non-union contractors who supported the aerospace ecosystem. It wasn't just one company leaving. It was the unraveling of an entire industrial ecosystem. Canada and Europe seized the opportunity. While Trump raged and the American media wrestled with the fallout, Canada and Europe moved quickly and strategically. Canada, under the calm leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney, launched an aerospace recovery initiative that welcomed dozens of U.S.-based suppliers across the border. Provincial premiers like François Legault in Quebec and Doug Ford in Ontario offered tax credits, training grants, and fast-track relocation permits. By January 2026, 6 new aerospace manufacturing zones were established in Canada, specifically designed to absorb the displaced U.S. supply chain. Across the Atlantic, Airbus celebrated the moment. It ramped up production in Toulouse and Hamburg while signing exclusive component deals with former Boeing partners. European governments coordinated to smooth out any regulatory hurdles and boost local employment. They saw Boeing stumble not as tragedy, but as opportunity. By contrast, the U.S. offered nothing but chaos and slogans. Boeing's global messaging: "We're open to the world." Even as American political leaders spun the exodus as betrayal, Boeing leaned into a new identity, a truly global company untethered from any single national agenda. In February 2026, CEO Kelly Ortberg stood on stage at the Singapore Air Show and unveiled Boeing's new corporate slogan, "Open to the world, innovation without borders." Behind him, slides showcased diverse production teams from Vietnam, Brazil, Mexico, and Morocco. Executives from nearly 30 countries signed memoranda of understanding for future jetliner contracts. And while Trump fumed from afar, world leaders praised Boeing's evolution into a 21st century aerospace pioneer. The message was clear. Boeing wasn't turning its back on America. It was simply choosing not to be chained to its dysfunction. As the dust settles, the American public is left with more than unemployment statistics. They're left with a choice. Will the U.S. cling to economic nationalism, walling itself off from a world that has already moved on, or will accept that global cooperation, not coercion, is a path to prosperity? Canada adapted, Europe expanded, Asia innovated, Boeing flew forward. And Trump? He stayed behind, holding the bag, blaming everyone but himself. History will remember this moment not as the collapse of Boeing's patriotism, but as the collapse of America's industrial strategy under a man who confused volume with vision. The runway was long, the takeoff was bumpy, but for Boeing and for the world, it was time to fly higher, without waiting for permission.